Commander Vexter stood in the observation chamber of the Kelthrian command ship and looked down at the small human colony. It was nothing. The settlement covered barely 20 square kilometers, with simple buildings made of metal and stone. The humans had been there for 10 years, trying to build something on this rocky world. They had no real military force. They had no advanced weapons. They had nothing that would trouble the Kelthrian Empire. Vexter was 4 meters tall, his body covered in thick scales that reflected the light of the nearby star. His 3 eyes moved independently, allowing him to see different parts of the room at the same time. He had conquered 17 systems in the past 50 cycles. He had crushed civilizations that thought they were strong. This colony would take no more than an afternoon to destroy. The Kelthrians had been the dominant force in the galaxy for 3,000 years. No one challenged them. No one even thought about challenging them. Worlds surrendered the moment Kelthrian ships entered their sky. It was always the same. One warning, one ultimatum. Then surrender or death. The communication officer called from his station. The humans had sent a request for a negotiation meeting. Vexter made a sound that was like grinding metal. The humans actually believed they could negotiate with the Kelthrian Empire. It was laughable. Captain Lisa Porter arrived at the negotiation chamber with Lieutenant Marcus Hayes. Lisa was a small woman, maybe 1.7 meters tall. She wore the gray uniform of Earth's Colonial Defense Force. Her face was calm, but Marcus could see her hands were tight. She was afraid. This was good. Fear meant surrender would come quickly. Ambassador Ty Warren sat across from them. He was smaller than Vexter, only 3 meters tall, but his presence was heavy. His 2 arms were thick and strong. His single eye focused on Lisa with complete attention. "You are the colony commander," Torn said. His voice came through a translation device that turned his Kelthrian sounds into human language. "I am," Lisa replied. Her voice was steady. "I want to discuss a peaceful resolution to this situation." Torn made a grinding sound that was his version of a laugh. "There is no resolution. The Kelthrian Empire is claiming this world and all resources in it. You will evacuate within 2 cycles. After that time, any humans remaining on this planet will be destroyed." Lisa felt her heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. She had known this might happen. The colony had been warned about the Kelthrian Empire before they left Earth. Everyone knew about the Kelthrians. Everyone knew they were conquering worlds and crushing anyone who opposed them. "We came to this world to build something," Lisa said. "We have children here. We have families. We have spent 10 years making this place into a home. We are not leaving. Then you will die," Torn said simply. "Give us more time," Lisa said. "If you want us to evacuate, give us the time to do it safely. We have almost 3,000 people here, including 600 children. Moving that many people requires organization and planning. 2 cycles is not enough." Marcus watched the Kelthrian ambassador. The single eye seemed to look through Lisa, not at her. It was like they were looking at something that was already dead. "You will have 2 cycles," Torn said. "Not more?" "The Kelthrian Empire does not negotiate. We give orders. You obey or you die. This is the only choice. There is no other option." The meeting ended. Kelthrian soldiers escorted Lisa and Marcus back to the colony. The humans had no weapons. They had no real defense against a fleet of 12 capital ships and 60 destroyers. The mathematics were simple. 2,998 humans against the Kelthrian military force. It was not even a real battle. It would be an execution. Lisa walked through the colony with Marcus following beside her. People stopped what they were doing and looked at her. They knew what had happened. They knew what the Kelthrians had said. They knew they had 2 cycles before the bombs started falling. In the residential sector, Children played with sticks and old pieces of metal. They did not understand what was coming. To them, the colony was the entire world. They had been born here or brought here as small children. This place was home. They did not think about Earth. They did not think about dying. Lisa went to the command center and sat at her desk. Marcus stood across from her, waiting for orders. The colony had weapons. Not many. They had anti-air defenses that would not stop the Kelthrians, but might damage one ship if they got lucky. They had rifles and grenades. They had nothing that would matter against a military force that had crushed 17 civilizations. "Send a message to Earth Command," Lisa said quietly. "Tell them what happened. Tell them we need help." "They are too far away," Marcus said. "Earth is 4 months from here at maximum speed. We will be dead in 2 cycles." "Send the message anyway," Lisa replied. "Tell them we are holding the colony. Tell them we are not surrendering. Maybe someone will hear the message. Maybe someone will come." Marcus sent the message. It went out into the darkness of space, traveling at the speed of radio waves. In 4 months, maybe someone on Earth would hear it. By then, the colony would be gone. By then, all 3,000 people would be dead. But Lisa Porter did not think about surrender. She did not think about evacuation. She sat at her desk and began making plans for a defense that could not work. She began thinking about how to make the Kelthrians bleed. She began thinking about how to make them pay for taking the colony. It was impossible. But impossible was the only choice that remained. Vexter watched from his ship as the human colony continued its work. They were still moving around. They were still building things. They did not understand what was coming. In 2 cycles, the Kelthrians would begin orbital strikes. They would destroy every building. They would kill every human. The colony would cease to exist. It would be easy. It would take no effort at all. Vexter turned away from the observation window and did not think about the humans anymore. They were not important. They were not even a real threat. They were simply a small problem that would be solved in 2 days. He was wrong. But he did not know that yet. The battle lasted 3 days. 3 days of continuous fighting. 3 days of explosions and weapons fire and death. 3 days of humans refusing to break and Kelthrians beginning to understand what they were facing. On the 2nd day, the Kelthrians learned a hard lesson. Captain Elena Rodriguez led a team through the colony's lower levels and emerged directly behind a Kelthrian advance position. Her soldiers opened fire. The Kelthrians, expecting attack from the front, died before they could turn around. 12 Kelthrians fell in less than 30 seconds. It was a small victory, but it proved that humans could think differently than the Kelthrians expected. The humans were not just fighting with weapons and numbers. They were fighting with strategy and knowledge of the terrain, and a willingness to take risks that made no logical sense. On the 3rd day, things changed. The Kelthrian commanders decided to change their tactics. They stopped trying to capture the colony intact. They began to focus on destroying it completely. More orbital strikes came, larger explosions, wider areas of destruction. The colony's hospital collapsed during one of the strikes. Dr. Amanda Wells, the chief medical officer, was still inside treating wounded soldiers. She had refused to evacuate. She had said there were too many wounded, and she could not leave them. When the building came down, she was trapped inside with 17 other people. Marcus tried to reach the hospital after the strike. He pushed through the rubble and the smoke, but there was no way through. The building was gone. Everyone inside was dead. Colonel Gray stood silently when Marcus told him the news. He did not speak. He did not show emotion. But in his pale blue eyes, something changed. He had lost soldiers before. He had lost friends in combat. But each death made him harder and colder and more determined to hurt the enemy. "Increase the attacks on their positions," Gray said to Rodriguez. Stop trying to preserve anything. We hurt them as much as we can. That is the only goal now. Rodriguez and her soldiers went back into the streets. They fought with a ferocity that shocked even the Kelthrians. The humans were dying. They knew they were dying. But they did not care anymore. They fought to kill as many Kelthrians as possible. They fought to make the Kelthrians pay for every second they spent in the colony. And Jennifer Walsh died on the morning of the third day. She had been shot twice and was bleeding badly. She had killed or wounded 14 Kelthrian soldiers. When she could no longer stand, she set an explosive device in her position and triggered it when the next Kelthrian squad moved toward her. She killed 5 of them and herself, but she did not retreat. She did not surrender. She held her position until death made her let go. Other soldiers followed her example. They fought in ways that made no logical sense. They held positions that could not be held. They protected people who might not survive anyway. They did things that a rational species would never do. They did things that humans had been doing for thousands of years on Earth, that they chose to die for something greater than themselves. The Kelthrian commanders were confused. Their military training was based on logic and calculation. Kill the enemy. Take the resource. Minimize losses. But the humans were not following these rules. The humans were accepting heavy losses. The humans were throwing soldiers at problems in ways that seemed wasteful and inefficient. And yet the humans were still fighting Dodd by the end of the third day. The Kelthrians had taken the entire colony. The humans had nowhere left to retreat to. They were cornered in the central shelter, surrounded by Kelthrian soldiers. The battle should have been over. But then something unexpected happened. The human warships attacked. The lead destroyer moved into a direct assault on the Kelthrian flagship. The human captain knew this was suicide. A small destroyer against a massive capital ship was not a fair fight. But the human captain was not thinking about fairness. He was thinking about buying time. He was thinking about allowing his soldiers on the ground to escape or regroup. The human destroyer took massive damage. Its shields failed. Its hull was breached in 3 places. But not before it had struck the Kelthrian flagship directly, damaging the command ship's engines and communication systems. In the confusion that followed, Colonel Gray moved his remaining soldiers. 60 people left alive out of 130. He gathered them in the deepest section of the shelter and prepared for a final stand. Vexter sat in his damaged command ship and finally understood. The humans had fought for 3 days. They had lost most of their soldiers. They had lost the colony. They had lost their people. But they were still fighting. They were still willing to die. One of Vexter's officers approached him. The officer was badly shaken. "Commander, the human forces are still engaging our troops in the central shelter. They are requesting that we allow them to evacuate non-combatants from the colony. If we refuse, they are prepared to fight to the death." "Accept the request," Vexter said quietly. The officer looked confused. "Commander?" "Accept their request. Allow the non-combatants to evacuate. And tell the ground forces to hold their positions. Do not press the attack on the shelter." Vexter had spent his entire career crushing civilizations. He had conquered 17 systems. He had never shown mercy to an enemy. But standing in his damaged command ship, looking down at a small human colony where fewer than 100 soldiers had fought 3 days against the Kelthrian military, he understood something fundamental about the nature of war and strength and power. The strongest power was not the ability to destroy. It was the ability to choose what mattered more than survival. It was the ability to look at certain death and stand anyway. It was the ability to care about something other than yourself. The Kelthrians had never encountered this power before. Lisa Porter stood in the central shelter and listened as Colonel Gray told her that the Kelthrians had agreed to allow evacuation. She did not believe it at first. Then she realized it was true. The Kelthrians were letting them go. The non-combatants began to move through the evacuation tunnels. The children went first, then the wounded, then the elderly and those who could not fight. Marcus helped people move toward the surface and toward the transport ships that had appeared to receive them. By the time evening fell, almost all the non-combatants had been evacuated. 3,000 people, most of them alive. The colony was destroyed. The settlement was gone. But the people had survived. In his command ship, Vexthor ordered the remaining Kelthrian forces to stand down. The battle was over. The colony was taken. The humans had been defeated. But somewhere inside him, in a place Vexthor did not fully understand, he knew that the Kelthrians had not won. They had encountered something they did not know how to fight. They had faced humans, and humans had changed them in ways they did not yet comprehend. The message came through at 3 in the morning. Marcus was sleeping at his station when the radio crackled to life. He jolted awake and heard the voice, crackling and distant but clear. It was Colonel Daniel Gray from Earth Command. "We are sending reinforcements. Not a full fleet. Not yet. But we are sending soldiers. 30 of the best we have. They will arrive in exactly 1 cycle from now. The transport ship is already in space and moving toward your position at maximum speed." Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. 30 soldiers against the Kelthrian armada. It was still impossible. But it was something. It was hope, however small and fragile. He ran to find Lisa. She was in the medical center, checking on the supplies and the equipment. When Marcus told her about the message, Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. 30 soldiers. 30 humans coming to stand with them. Who is leading them? Lisa asked. Colonel Daniel Gray. The message said he would not leave humans to die without a fight. Those were his exact words. The message said, Gray told the soldiers that no human settlement would fall while humans still had the ability to defend it. Lisa nodded slowly. She had heard of Daniel Gray. Everyone in the Colonial Defense Force knew his name. He was legendary. He had led soldiers in every major conflict across 3 continents before the United Nations created the unified government. He was old now, maybe 50, but he was still dangerous. If anyone could hurt the Kelthrians, it would be him. The news spread through the colony quickly. Humans began to change. Fear did not disappear, but it transformed into something different. It became focus. It became preparation. Families that had been talking about evacuation began making other plans. In the ammunition storage, soldiers began checking weapons. They counted rounds. They tested firing mechanisms. They knew the weapons would not be enough, but they would use what they had. Humans had always fought with what they had. The colony's engineers began preparing defenses. They reinforced the central shelter where the children would be protected. They set up barriers and created killing zones where Kelthrian soldiers would have to fight in tight spaces where numbers did not matter. They dug tunnels and hidden positions. They worked without sleeping because they knew they had less than 1 cycle. In his private quarters, Colonel Daniel Gray sat in the transport ship and reviewed the colony's defenses. The information was not good. The colony had almost nothing. But Gray had fought in worse situations. He had looked at bad odds before, and he had found ways to win. Gray was a tall man with dark hair turning gray at the temples. His face was scarred from a burn injury he had received 15 years ago. His eyes were pale blue, and they seemed to look through people instead of at them. He had killed in combat more than 70 times. He had lost soldiers in his command. He had seen war in ways most humans never experienced, but he had also survived. And he had kept his soldiers alive when everyone said they would die. Gray called his soldiers together in the transport ship's cargo bay. 30 men and women, all trained in advanced combat. All strong. All fast. All dangerous. They stood in formation and waited for their colonel to speak. The Kelthrians are not what you think they are, Gray said. His voice was quiet, but it filled the entire space. Every soldier could hear him clearly. They are strong. They are fast. They are well trained. But they are not invincible. No species is invincible. We have learned this on Earth over many centuries. Gray walked along the line of soldiers, looking at each one directly in the eyes. The Kelthrians think we are weak because we are small and our technology is not advanced. They think we will surrender because that is what every other species does. They do not understand what humans are. They do not know that we fight hardest when we are cornered. They do not know that we are dangerous when we are protecting our own. He stopped in front of Captain Elena Rodriguez. She was the strongest soldier in the group. She had spent 20 years in combat training. She had killed in combat, and she did not hesitate. Captain Rodriguez, Gray said, you will lead the defense of the colony's eastern sector. Your job is to make the Kelthrians bleed. Not to win, not to destroy them completely, just to hurt them. Make them understand that taking this colony will cost them something. Yes, sir, Rodriguez replied. Gray continued along the line. Each of you will be assigned a sector or a specific task. Your job is the same for everyone. Hurt them. Kill them if you can. Make them understand that humans are not something you can simply crush like insects. Make them understand that we fight back. The soldiers understood. They would probably die. Most of them knew this, but they were going anyway. Because that is what humans do. Humans fight for things that matter. Humans stand against the darkness, even when they know they will probably lose. The transport ship descended toward the colony as the first cycle ended, and the second cycle began. Vexter watched from his command ship as the human military vessel entered the planet's atmosphere. He was curious about this. The humans were bringing soldiers. It was almost funny. 30 soldiers against an armada that had crushed civilizations. But Vexter had conquered 17 systems, and he had become comfortable in his conquest. He did not think carefully about what the humans were planning. He did not consider that bringing soldiers meant the humans had decided to fight. He simply accepted it as confirmation that the humans were foolish. When Colonel Gray stepped out of the transport ship and onto the colony's landing pad, Lisa Porter was waiting for him. Gray was taller than Lisa by almost half a meter. He was older than she was. But when they shook hands, something passed between them. A recognition. A shared understanding. They both knew what was coming. They both knew it would be terrible. But they both also knew they would not surrender. They would not break. They would stand and fight, and make the Kelthrians understand that humans were not creatures that could be easily destroyed. Marcus watched the soldiers deploy through the colony. They moved with purpose and precision. They did not waste time. They did not hesitate. They began preparing for battle immediately. In his command ship, Vexter made a final communication to his fleet. The bombardment would begin at the start of the third cycle. The humans would be destroyed. The colony would be claimed. It would be easy. But in the colony, 30 soldiers and 3,000 civilians began preparing for war. They did not believe they would win, but they believed they would fight. And sometimes that is enough. The first explosion came at dawn. Colonel Gray was already awake and standing at the command center when the orbital strikes began. The ground shook. Building alarms began to scream. Outside, massive columns of fire rose into the air where Kelthrian weapons had struck the outer perimeter of the colony. Get everyone into the shelters, Gray said to Marcus. Now, move. The colony exploded into movement. Civilians ran for the protected underground bunkers. Children held their parents' hands and moved as fast as they could. Soldiers ran toward their assigned defensive positions. Captain Elena Rodriguez, was in the eastern sector with 12 soldiers. The Kelthrian orbital strikes had destroyed 3 buildings in her zone, but they had also created rubble and wreckage that could be used for cover. Rodriguez knew the Kelthrians would land ground troops soon. They could not destroy the entire colony from orbit. They wanted it. They wanted the resources. They would need soldiers to clear the buildings and secure the settlement. The Kelthrian dropships descended through the smoke and fire. They were large transport vessels, carrying 30 soldiers each. 5 ships landed in Rodriguez's sector alone. 150 Kelthrian soldiers, each one 3 meters tall and covered in heavy combat armor. The first soldier to exit a dropship died immediately. Rodriguez and her team had trained for this exact scenario. They had studied Kelthrian armor specifications. They knew where the weak points were. The first Kelthrian took a rifle round directly in the neck joint where the armor did not fully cover the body. The soldier fell. More Kelthrians emerged. They expected easy targets. They expected frightened colonists and a few poorly trained soldiers. Instead, they found a trained military force that was ready for them. Rodriguez led her team in a fighting retreat. They did not try to hold the outer perimeter. That would have been suicide. Instead, they pulled back into the colony's interior where the buildings were dense and close together. They moved into spaces where Kelthrian numbers did not matter. They moved into spaces where one human with a rifle could kill a Kelthrian before it could even raise its weapon dot in the northern sector. Sergeant Marcus Chen led 8 soldiers through the colony's maintenance tunnels. The Kelthrians were advancing through the streets above, destroying buildings and looking for human defenders. Chen's team emerged from underground tunnels, opened fire from unexpected positions, and then vanished back into the tunnels before the Kelthrians could respond. By mid-morning, 3 Kelthrian soldiers had been killed in the northern sector. It was nothing. 3 soldiers out of hundreds. But it was proof that humans could hurt them. It was proof that the Kelthrians were not invincible. Colonel Gray moved through the colony, monitoring the battle. The central command center was deep underground, protected by concrete and steel. Screens showed the positions of human fighters and Kelthrian forces. The numbers were very bad. 130 human soldiers against 2,000 Kelthrian ground troops. The Kelthrians still had superior numbers and superior firepower, but the humans had training. The humans had knowledge of the colony's layout. The humans had something else that the Kelthrians did not understand. The humans were desperate. They were fighting for their homes and their families. They were fighting for something other than themselves. In the western sector, Ensign Jennifer Walsh was only 19 years old. She had joined the Colonial Defense Force to escape poverty and find a new life. Now she was lying behind a barricade, watching Kelthrian soldiers advance toward her position. She was the only human soldier in her zone. Everyone else had been wounded or killed. Jennifer thought about her mother back on Earth. She thought about her younger brother. She thought about the families in this colony, hiding in the shelters underground. She thought about the children, who did not understand what was happening. The first Kelthrian rounded the corner and Jennifer fired. The soldier went down. More came. Jennifer kept shooting. Her rifle was small compared to Kelthrian weapons, but it was accurate, and she was skilled. She killed 2 more Kelthrians before a weapon blast caught her in the shoulder. The pain was intense, but Jennifer did not stop fighting. She changed position, kept shooting, kept fighting. She knew she was going to die. She had accepted this when she joined the Defense Force. But she would not die without killing as many Kelthrians as she could. Above the colony, the human Defense Force ships descended. They were old vessels, outdated by galactic standards. But they were real warships. They had weapons. They had shields. They had experienced crews. The lead human destroyer opened fire on a Kelthrian capital ship. The Kelthrian ship turned to engage, But the human captain had already anticipated the maneuver. Missiles struck at the exact moment when the Kelthrian shields were rotating to the new position. The Kelthrian ship shook from the impact. Alarm sounded in its command center. For the first time in the battle, a Kelthrian warship had been damaged. On the ground, the fighting continued. The Kelthrians were advancing, but they were advancing slowly. They were being forced to clear every building, every street, every corner. They were bleeding. Not much, but they were bleeding. By afternoon, 17 Kelthrian soldiers had been killed. 38 had been wounded. The human forces had suffered as well. Colonel Gray had lost 8 soldiers. 43 colonists had been killed by orbital strikes. But the colony was still fighting. It had not surrendered. In the central command center, Gray made a decision. He sent a message to the Kelthrian commander. The message was simple: surrender. Leave this world. You have already lost more soldiers than this colony is worth. The Kelthrian commander did not respond with words. He responded with more orbital strikes. The colony shook again. More buildings fell. More people died. But the colony did not surrender. The soldiers did not break. The civilians did not lose hope. As darkness fell, the Kelthrians stopped the assault. They pulled back their soldiers to defensive positions. They regrouped. They planned. They were beginning to understand that taking this colony was going to be more difficult than they had thought. In his command ship, Vexter stood in the observation chamber and watched the colony below. The battle was supposed to be easy. The Kelthrians were supposed to crush the humans in hours. Instead, the humans were fighting with a ferocity that was unexpected. The humans had killed Kelthrian soldiers. They had damaged a Kelthrian warship. They had refused to surrender, even when surrender was their only rational choice. Vexter was beginning to understand that the humans were not what he had assumed they were. They were not weak creatures that would break easily. They were something different. Something dangerous. The second cycle of the battle was coming. More soldiers would be deployed. More weapons would be used. The Kelthrians would crush the colony eventually. But it would take longer than anyone had expected. And by the time it was over, the Kelthrians would understand something fundamental. They would understand why humans were feared. 6 months after the battle, the Kelthrian High Council convened in the grand chamber of their capital world. The room was massive, designed to hold the leaders of the Kelthrian Empire. Representatives from every conquered system sat in their assigned positions. They had gathered to hear a report on the colony incident, the event that had begun to change the way the Kelthrians understood power and conquest. Vexter stood before them and began to speak. His voice was clear and measured, but it carried a weight that had not been there before. He had been changed by what happened at the colony. The humans are not what we assumed them to be, Vexter said. I stand before you to report that the Kelthrian military doctrine requires fundamental revision. We have operated under the assumption that conquest is a simple process. We show strength. The weak surrender. We claim their resources. This process has worked for 3,000 years. But it has not worked with the humans. The council chamber fell silent. No one interrupted Vexter. They were all watching him carefully. The humans on the colony fought for 3 days, Vexter continued. They were outnumbered 40-1. They had inferior weapons and inferior technology. They had no real chance of victory. A rational species would have surrendered after the first day. A logical species would have calculated the cost and accepted the outcome. But the humans did not surrender. The humans did not accept the outcome. The humans fought for 3 days, and they made us bleed, and they made us pay a price for taking their world. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle into the chamber. But that is not the important part. The important part is why they fought. They did not fight because they believed they could win. They fought because they believed they had to stand. They fought because they had people they wanted to protect. They fought because choosing to fight mattered to them more than choosing to survive. The lead council member, High Chancellor Sorth, stood and addressed Vexter. What is the strategic recommendation? Should we avoid human contact? Should we eliminate the threat while it is still small? Vexter looked directly at the Chancellor. No, I recommend that we respect the humans. I recommend that we understand them. And I recommend that we prepare our civilization for a species that will be our equal within 2 generations. The humans will develop technology. They will build military power. And when they do, they will be dangerous not because of their weapons. They will be dangerous because of their nature. On a Keltharian colonial world on the far side of the galaxy, a young military strategist named Skelver was studying the battle records. She had requested all available information from the colony incident, and she had spent months reviewing it. The more she studied the battle, the more she began to understand the truth of what Vexter had reported to the High Council. The humans had done things that did not make sense according to standard military logic. They had held positions that could not be held. They had sacrificed soldiers in ways that seemed wasteful. They had fought with what appeared to be complete disregard for their own survival. But as Skelver studied the footage more carefully, she realized that the humans were not disregarding their own survival. They were choosing something greater than survival. They were choosing to protect others. They were choosing to stand for something. Skelver made a note in her analysis. The notes would become required reading for all Keltharian military officers. Human psychology was different. Human motivation could not be predicted by standard rational models. Humans were dangerous because they were willing to pay prices that no other species would pay. On Earth, the United Nations held a ceremony for the dead of the colony incident. The names were read aloud. 47 colonists had been killed in the bombing. 17 soldiers had fallen in combat. Dr. Amanda Wells, Ensign Jennifer Walsh, Sergeant Kevin Park, who had thrown himself between an incoming blast and a group of children, and many others. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood before the memorial wall and thought about what the humans had done. The colony had been retaken by the Keltharians. The settlement had been destroyed, but the people had survived. Almost 3,000. People had escaped because 60 soldiers had been willing to fight for 3 days, knowing they could not win. It was not a victory in the traditional sense. The colony was lost. The Keltharians held the world. But something had been won anyway. Something that had spread across human civilization and changed the way they thought about themselves. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. Humans were not the most advanced technologically. Humans were not the fastest or the largest or the most powerful. But humans had something that transcended all those things. Humans had choice. Humans could look at impossible odds and choose to stand anyway because they believed something mattered more than their own lives. Back at the colony, in the ruins of what had once been a human settlement, Colonel Daniel Gray walked through the destroyed buildings. The Keltharians had allowed him to return to evaluate the damage. Gray was old now, gray hair where there had been dark hair before. The war had aged him in ways that years alone could not. He stood at the grave of Ensign Jennifer Walsh. The young soldier had been 24 years old. She had her entire life ahead of her. But when she saw the opportunity to hurt the Keltharians, she had taken it. She had held her position alone, and she had died alone, and she had killed more of the enemy in death than many soldiers. Kill a lifetime of service. Marcus was with Gray. He had survived the battle. He had returned with the colonel to honor the dead. She was so young, Marcus said quietly. She was old enough to understand what mattered, Gray replied. She was old enough to know that some things matter more than staying alive. That is all that courage requires. They stood in silence for a moment. Around them, the colony was being rebuilt. Humans were clearing the rubble. Humans were planning new structures. Humans were making the choice to return and rebuild in a place where the Kelthrians had tried to destroy them. Lisa Porter came to find Gray and Marcus. She had decided to return to the colony. She had decided that the settlement would be rebuilt. She had decided that humans would stay on this world and make it a home again. The Kelthrians have sent a message, Lisa said. They want to establish a formal trade agreement. They want to recognize our sovereignty over this colony. Gray turned to face her. Are you going to accept? Yes, Lisa said. We are. The Kelthrians are afraid of us now. Not of our weapons. They are afraid of our nature. They are afraid of what we are willing to do. Gray smiled, and it was a rare expression on his hard face. That is good. That is exactly what they should be afraid of. In space above the colony, Kelthrian observation ships maintained their orbit. They were not there to threaten anymore. They were there to study. They were there to understand humans. They were there because the Kelthrian Empire had finally realized that something had changed in the galaxy. A new species had arrived that would not be conquered. A species that would fight for something greater than itself. And the Kelthrians had learned the final truth about power and strength. True power was not measured in weapons or technology or numbers. True power was measured in the willingness to stand against the darkness, knowing that you might fall, knowing that you might die, and choosing to stand anyway because something mattered more than your own survival. The humans had entered the battlefield, and they had changed everything.